I also like I have a stupid question in the back of my mind, which is like, does training work?
Wait, I probably need to check my business card because it probably says VP of training
Head
somewhere.
trainer
Like,
of training.
no, this is professional suicide right now. So we're definitely going to edit this bit out. But you always hire people that are smarter than you, and I've done a really good job of that recently. I have a bunch of smart people that are on my team.
And hopefully they're all listening to this, and if they're really smart, they'll also share this episode with all their friends.
I'll make sure of it.
In fact, 9 out of 10 people who listen share the episode.
Love it. Call back, Cialdini.
Hey, Alma, what's going on?
Hey, Tuli, and welcome everyone. It's a Friday. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday to you too, or happy whatever day it is that you're listening to this
Yes.
podcast. Who is our guest today?
Oh my goodness. This brilliant human being. His name is Bob Tweedie. He is someone we met as an instructor, but he is also a learning and development professional. And you can say a little bit more because I think you have his profile.
Well, yeah, that's right. No, I mean, yeah,
What else?
Bob Tweedie was our instructor in graduate school at at Northwestern. Taught us in a class called Cognitive Design, which was a great class. And he's also he is the VP of Leadership and Learning at Revantage, which is a Blackstone Portfolio Company. And he's a really awesome human being.
Yeah. And so the conversation is great. We had such a wonderful time. I'll just say one thing about this. And it's hard to put it into words, but for anyone who is interested in leadership, learning, and development within any type of organization, this is a conversation that is packed with just solid gold nuggets of his wisdom, of very really good frameworks, but also his stories. And I learned so much. It might as well have been a class that isn't a class, right? We talk about learning, right? That's one of the reasons we started this podcast, is because we're interested in learning. And I just have to say, I learned so much, and I know that everyone listening will learn so much from him because he was very, very generous.
Yeah, it was a great conversation, and thanks for joining us. And I hope you enjoy this conversation with Alma and me and Bob Tweedie.
Woo! Okay, let's do this.
Let's do it.
All right. Well, Bob Tweedie, welcome. Alma and I got to know you about a year ago, a little bit more, because you were an instructor in one of our graduate school classes. And we had a grand old time getting to learn from you.
You can quiz us right now.
Well, if we talk about Cialdini, I'll be asking for the six sources of influence and persuasion. So
I'll be Googling that right now. And
why don't we start there? I mean, we'll get into your professional journey in a moment, and I think that's a really important thing to do. But you mentioned Robert Cialdini just now. Can you tell us who he is and how you came to be introduced to his work?
Over the course of my entire graduate experience, the Cialdini stuff really stood out to me, simply because it almost felt like a look under the cover of how to influence and persuade. It almost felt like a magical power. And I was always intrigued by how to get people to say yes, because I've always felt that I was not very good at doing it. And so when you see it and read it and you understand the concepts and the simplicity of it and the applicability of it, and then you start to see where this can be helpful, it's everywhere. It's absolutely everywhere. And I'm fascinated by is it influence or is it manipulation? And in the hands of somebody that can be somewhat unethical, it can go awry very, very quickly. But we were talking about it actually in class just this week. One of the examples that I saw recently was around social proof, and Ryan Smerrick, of course, who everybody knows. Shout out to Ryan. was talking about booking.com. And if you think about booking.com, they have two things that I imagine stem from Cialdini's work, which is when you're going on and booking a hotel room, you see the price and you see there's only 7 rooms available left at this price.
Yeah.
And you go, the scarcity things, well, I better sign up now. And on top of that, they say, and there's 10 other people looking at this very page right now. So you've got this social proof thing going on. So you've got two concepts coming together, which are super powerful. So much so that the marketing team of Booking said to the technology department, I think there's something wrong because there's such a spike in sales. Are these numbers correct? And then I was booking a ticket on American. I'm going down to Florida next week. And you know how at the end, when you go all the way through it, they say, would you like to buy insurance for this flight?
Oh,
I always go, no, I'm not buying insurance. And they say, well, you know what? 104,684 people already bought insurance this week.
And those people are smarter than you, basically.
Smarter than me, way smarter than me. So, but I still clicked no, but it got me thinking, wow, these principles are everywhere, absolutely everywhere. But you know, if I come back to the unethical side of things, my wife and I, we invested in a property up in Wisconsin recently, and we put it on Airbnb, and we got a request, an inquiry to say, how far are you away from this particular place? I think it's called Timber Lodge. And I looked up, and it was about 28 minutes. And I had this dilemma. I said, well, I could put 28 minutes, and I could also say, oh, we had a similar request this morning. So if you want to book this place, you need to book it quickly. And I didn't want to be that guy. I want to obviously grow my business, but I didn't want to do it unethically. Unfortunately, they didn't come back and book the place, so I lost out, but I can still sleep at night.
Yeah. It's so funny because the other day my wife and I were, we went to tour a school for our almost 3-year-old for next year. And one of the first things they said to us was, we're almost full. And right away, I thought to myself, are they really? They might, but are they really almost full? Or is this scarcity?
Once you see it, it's everywhere. And you start to doubt people's intentions. But I guess that's where some positive intent is so helpful.
Yeah. So perhaps we'll get back to this. But yeah, maybe if we could back up a little bit. Obviously, we got to know you as an instructor. You're also quite an accomplished professional, and we'd love to hear kind of what you're doing now and how you got there.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for saying that. It's been a long journey, an interesting journey, and if you ask anybody in our field of learning and development, everybody has an origin story that's very, very different. Yeah. And I'm always fascinated by, what did you do as an undergrad? Because not many undergrads, I don't know if there's any undergrads in our field of work, but when you look at their journeys to get there, it's a building block of experiences and opportunity and luck, a lot, mentorship. I actually studied, my undergrad was in finance, international business and modern languages, but I majored in finance and French. And I did that in Glasgow until 97. So aging myself a little bit, but graduated in 97 and then moved to France straight away. And I knew that I didn't want to do finance. I knew probably society thinks I should work for one of the big 8 at the time or a big bank. And because I studied German and French, maybe a global role would be cool. That didn't happen. I got a couple of interviews for Accenture and a couple of the other banks, didn't really go anywhere. And then my first job was actually as a financial translator, translating documents from French to English, literally the world's most boring job. Think about it, piece of paper. Can you give me this user manual in English? Sure. And so, I didn't have typewriters back in the day, but that's what it felt like.
Oh, goodness.
And once you're done with it, you hand it across to somebody else.
You were the Google Translate of 1998.
Well, back in the day, the internet was just kind of coming around, and you were working out of paper dictionaries and word lists and glossaries and things like that. It was terrible. Oh, so wow. I fast forward 5 years. I went to HR and I said, I can't do this anymore. And they said, well, do you speak English? I said, yeah, I do actually, with an accent, but I do. And they said, well, we need somebody in training. I said, I know nothing about training. I said, we'll teach you. And so that started a full swing from the worst job in the world to what I truly believe is the best job in the world today. I love what I do. I love it with
So cool.
every vein in my body. And so there's just lots and lots of experiences that I've learned over the day. But yeah, pure luck. That's how I got into it.
Wow. Okay, so wait, so you started in training, kind of this pure luck. That's a really cool origin story. And I like your comment about everyone's origin story is a little different. Yeah, I don't think anyone in undergrad was like, I want to be a talent professional.
I don't even know what that
You
means.
know what that is.
Yeah.
It took me many years to understand that I was a consultant in talent and organizational change. So, but you said you started in training. So they teach you things, and then how did this evolve? What training was your first love? Then what other skills did you pick up? Like what happened from there?
So I realized that as I reflect back on it, just how fortunate I was. So I joined, and I don't know if she'll ever listen to this, but a lady called Doina Patrubani, who's had a huge, massive influence in my life, always has been. I worked with her for 3 years, and I talk a lot about leaders that have an impact on other leaders, and she had a massive impact on my career. And I still talk about all the lessons that I learned from her to this day. And so she was the regional director of learning for Deloitte, Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And so we had a lot of fun for the 3 years that I worked with her. We used to run training south of Athens in September and October. So we used to go out there for 4 weeks. It was like 75 degrees, 80 degrees in a 5-star luxury hotel. We used to run programs for 5 to 7 days out in Greece. Management, new manager school, new senior manager school. I always remember we did one of the modules on a boat going out to Hydra, which is a Greek island.
Hydra of Leonard Cohen fame. Sure.
It's a beautiful place. There's no cars. You can only get around in donkeys. And I reflect on that in today's world of, this new manager school that we're designing, can you do it in 2 days? Well, we used to do them in 7. And so it was a fascinating time. And I started off what I call doing bums on seats, pure logistics. And then from there, it evolved into design, facilitation, actually leading the program. I remember one year I was quote unquote program director. So I was in front of 300 people introducing the program, congratulating people on the promotion to manager. And then I was going to do the trainer. And then I was in the room doing the actual facilitation for one of the groups. And so just a phenomenal learning curve, super steep learning curve. But if you're not put into situations that get you uncomfortable, then you're not learning. Yeah. So I managed to go through all what I now know are the 4 phases of what you need to be successful in our world, which is needs analysis, design, delivery, and program evaluation. I got to do all 4. So I did that with Doina for 3 years, and then when Doina moved into a different role, I took over that. Her responsibilities for a very, very short period of time. And then I became part of the broader global learning function in Deloitte. Yeah. And just learned my craft through a variety of different leaders there.
Dang, that's crazy. Okay, I have so many questions. I'll start with one little one. What is it? So you find that you love it, but if you could isolate or if you could capture in what's the moment or the thing that really makes you light up about
that's an easy training. One, Alma. That's an easy one.
Good, let's hear it.
When I love to facilitate. I just love just to get in a room, whether it's senior leaders, brand new professionals. And I love when you say something, people go and they pick up their pen and they write stuff down.
What we just did.
Yeah. It makes you feel that you're adding value to someone. Yeah. And if I was to summarize, what is the role of L&D today? It's to help other people be successful. And when somebody comes to you, and I'll never forget this gentleman who went through, in my prior role at Deloitte, he went through manager school, he went through our hypo program, he went through our senior manager school, and he went through our associate director program, all programs that we were part of. And on his very last day, he calls me and he says, I'm moving to the West Coast. I've got this dream job with Amazon. And I wanted to call you personally because of all the development opportunities you and your team created for me. And it's been a massive contribution to my success. And I was a very, very senior guy over at Amazon. But it's moments like that where you go, wow, even though I'm working for a for-profit company, what we're doing essentially is we're making individuals and teams and companies be successful. And that in my world is that's why we do it.
That's really fantastic.
Cool. Yeah. You also mentioned the 4 phases, I think you called them, of learning and development. I want to get back to that. But actually, there's another thing that interests me, because you've kind of like, we haven't gotten deep into it. You were in France, right, when you started this, and then you were working in Greece, and then you were working with Northern Africa, and etc. So you have multicultural experience and learning and development experience in other cultures. What can you share about doing this type of work in Europe, well, in France, and perhaps in Greece? And what have you learned from that multicultural perspective?
I learned, it's such a powerful question, Alma, and I don't know that it's not as though that you all of a sudden you're having these aha moments about working with different cultures. It's only when you get to reflect on it and you think about where you are today versus what you learned. And if I think about that, I probably made more mistakes than anybody else in the entire career accumulating. Because if I look at my own culture growing up, it's a very mono culture. Scotland is a very mono country. And by mono, I mean it's monolingual, it's monocultural, it's mono-religious, it's mono everything. Yeah. A lot of people, frankly, look and sound like each other. And so growing up, you just don't have the exposure. I didn't have the exposure of other cultures, other ethnicities, other languages, other foods, other anything other than the travel that I did with my parents and my family. And so it was a huge eye-opener. And if you just apply your own culture and the way that you do things to working with others, that's where it gets tricky. That's where it gets very tricky, because what works in one culture doesn't work in others. And so moving to France was the first time that I really opened my eyes to the whole world out there. And I think when you work in Europe and you work with folks from the US, for example, what I found at the time was the US, particularly in the company that I was working for, they often had the biggest budgets, the biggest programs. They used to call themselves a big gorilla. I'll never forget that. They said, no, we're the big gorilla around this table. And so if we're going to decide what we're going to do globally, we're going to have the biggest share of that pie. And so interesting. And now I find myself on the other foot in a different organization where, if I'm going to be honest, we're further ahead in the maturity curve of some of the other teams that we work with. But simply that doesn't make us any better or stronger. It's just that we started 3 years earlier. And so we've made those mistakes. So we're ready now to be in a position of adding value. And so it's made me very cognizant of not being the quote unquote perceived big gorilla when I'm working now with colleagues from Europe and Asia. It's interesting to have the shoe on the other foot almost. And I think that's helping. It's helping build credibility and trust when you're working in a global team.
Yeah.
Fantastic. I mean, you said 2 things that I want to, if I may, go back and double click on. The first is, and this is kind of a classic question, but I'm interested because you mentioned it. Can you talk a little bit about maybe a mistake that you made that you learned something from? And specifically in the cultural realm, I think this might be an interesting kind of teaching moment.
Actually, you're putting me on the spot here.
All right, no worries. I'll move on to my next question. And
many mistakes. Let's come back to it, because I want to get one that's helpful.
Yeah.
Let me come back to it.
Yeah, let's get back to it. The other thing that I was curious about, there's a word that was going through my mind, which is authenticity. People talk about being authentic. I'm curious first, and people talk about being authentic in the workplace. Right. I'm curious, first of all, how do you think about that? Like, what does that mean to you? Do you agree with it? And also, how does one, from your experience, how does one both be authentic to themselves and their own culture, their upbringing, but also be accepting and open and sensitive to others at the same time in the workplace?
One of my colleagues right now is helping me embrace my own weirdness. And I love that. This is a relatively recent thing for me, because I think we all suffer from imposter syndrome, am I adding value all the time? And, why should people follow me, et cetera, et cetera. And then we all have certain eccentricities. And if you truly want to be yourself at work, are you allowed to do that? Does the organizational culture support that?
Right.
And I've never, if I'm being honest, I've never really stopped the organizational culture from stopping me being me at my weirdest. And I'm not saying I'm weird, but I just love the word weird, because we're all weird in a certain way. And as a leader, I think if people can see the vulnerabilities that you struggle with, and if you think out loud sometimes, I think that to me is being authentic, is not putting on this facade of you have all your shit together and you've got it all figured out, and you never struggle with anything, you never have a bad day, you've got it all figured out. And I found that the more I lean into that, the more authentic I hope people see me as. And I do think that leads to credibility, bizarrely. The more vulnerable you are, the more credible you are, because they see the struggles that you go through, and then hopefully they see the value that you bring despite those struggles. And I think there's another part of being authentic is, and I learned this relatively recently as well, just this difference between being interested versus interesting.
Mm.
And those people that like to talk about themselves and their accomplishments, they're interesting. But if you're not being interested about the other person, that's where you can get true value. That's when you can build those strong, solid relationships, trust, you name it. Whether it's with your team members, with anybody, the cashier at the local supermarket, senior leaders, team members, everybody. The more that you can be authentic and embrace your weirdness, I think it's helpful. There's too many facades in this world, I think.
Mm.
I really love that. And I think that I'm hearing two kind of really important lessons for leaders, which is number one, be a role model. So actually model your authenticity, your weirdness, in whatever way, obviously within reason, and number two, I'm hearing, you're talking about actually being interested in the people, in your people, being curious about them, being open to them. I think those are two very, very powerful ways of making space for others in the workplace.
Tuli, what I've come to realize relatively recently as well is that as a leader, the more that you can just ask questions and listen, and I still have massive gaps in this area, and I'm working hard every day to build on it. But the more that you can listen and step back, it actually takes all the pressure off, because you hire a bunch of smart people, but if you're always trying to be the smartest guy in the room, then you're stifling everybody's credibility. You're stifling you're not empowering them. You're not letting them come up with new ideas, fresh ideas, innovate. And that's super vulnerable to do as a leader as well, because if you're giving them all the leeway and the scope, well, what are you getting paid for? What value add do you bring? But one of my leaders here in my current role gave me the advice that you always hire people that are smarter than you. And I've done a really good job of that recently. I have a bunch of smart people that are on my team right now, and it's scary. I've told them this. That's my biggest fear, is that my team is collectively super, super strong.
Mm.
That's awesome. And hopefully they're all listening to this, and if they're really smart, they'll also share this episode with all their friends.
I'll make sure of it.
In fact, 9 out of 10 people who listen share the episode.
Love it. Call back, Cialdini.
I had to. You just set it up for me. It was like on a silver platter.
That was fantastic. Yeah, very good.
Okay, I have a question about this authenticity thing. So thank you for bringing it up. Tuli, really cool. And then the cultural thing, right? Because I'm still trying to understand, how do you balance, or I don't know if you see it this way, but how do you balance, Bob, being authentic, right? And also understanding, like, when you are in a global setting, when you're working with people from different cultures, or you're in a culture that's not your own, how do you balance authenticity with cultural sensitivity and adapting? And I'll give a little bit of context of where I'm kind of approaching this question. What I know about a little, about learning and development is one of the things is you want to tailor your content and the way that you facilitate and deliver, right, to your specific audience, right? Your audience is really, really important in how, and communication in general, right? Audience is key. And so how can you be, when you are facilitating, when you are working with leaders, how can you still be Bob, right? But also understand that how Bob can show up in, I don't know, Moroccan culture or Greek culture, which I know nothing of, may need to be tailored, or does it? How do you deal with that kind of that tension?
Yeah, again, such a powerful question. I think it reminds me of an experience I had. I went out to facilitate a workshop. This is going back maybe, 15 years. I can't believe it's that long, but it was 15 years. It was a workshop in Hong Kong with our former chief learning officer, myself, and one of the authors of one of the books that I recommend to anybody getting into learning and development is The 6 Disciplines of Breakthrough Learning. And we were leading a workshop on how do you do effective learning, going through the 4 phases: needs analysis, design, delivery, and evaluation and measurement, with all of the learning professionals across all of Asia. And so they were flying in from Australia, Hong Kong, China, all over Southeast Asia. And what we found was, as soon as we would ask a question, many of the cultures, all the eyes would just go directly to the most senior person in the room. And that was a fascinating journey on how do you facilitate, particularly when the response that you get back is not the response that you were looking for. It's like an incorrect response, and everybody else is nodding politely, going, "Yes, that was a great response." And I guarantee you I didn't handle it well, but it was just interesting to be able to facilitate in that environment.
Yeah.
And come on, and on the fly, we had to redesign so that some of the more senior folks were in groups by themselves, and some of the more junior folks were in groups by themselves as well. And so we reduced that hierarchy almost in the discussions, and it led to a lot more open conversation. Yeah. So that was just a fascinating insight into how do you facilitate cross-culturally.
Yeah, good stuff.
Yeah, that's great. Let's
nice.
Let's get back to those 4 components of Is it of facilitation or of L&D? And go ahead. Sorry.
L&D. It's L&D. If you think about the model that most people know is the ADDIE model, and I'm probably going to mix up a couple of words here, but it's analysis, design, delivery, implementation, and evaluation. I haven't Googled it, but the ADDIE model is the industry standard, and we simplified that down, my former company, Deloitte, into four separate phases. Needs analysis. Mm-hmm. So are you understanding the problem to be solved? And you're not making it up. You're not in your ivory tower of, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we did a program on X? But actually aligning your solution to a business problem. It has to start with that, defining business outcomes. And then that then informs your design. And it could be training, it could not be training. But unless you've had the business conversation first with business leaders, using their terms, not ours, then everything else is going to fall flat. The design could be e-learning, in-person, virtual, whatever that looks, could be mentoring on the job. There's lots and lots of different solutions to meeting the objective and the need that was defined in the first phase. And then the delivery, how do you deliver that in a way that's effective? It's not just training, it might be pre, post. And then you come full circle with the final phase of how are you actually evaluating your ability to solve the gap that was identified in the first phase.
Yeah.
And are you documenting those results? And we talk about it in, I think it's one of Ryan's classes where you talk about the 4 different phases of learning evaluation, whether it's a smiley sheet appreciation, or are you measuring for retention, level 2, application, level 3, and level 4 is ROI. Can you actually put a specific metric on a change in the business that's occurred because of the solution that you've identified and created?
That's fantastic. And Alma, one thing that's coming to my mind, and I wonder what if you'll have anything to add to this, to the following question, which is, I think that a lot of people, myself included, but I think lots of people have had some negative experiences with some training that they've had in their life. I think almost all of us, that we've been to a training.
Not difficult.
Right? We're like, what is this?
Mike, you're not talking about 452, right? You're not talking about
never.
Just to be clear.
No, I'm not talking about the best class ever taught. And not only that. No, I mean, but that was a great class, and we should talk more about that. But no, I think we've all had experiences where we're like, what? And so what I'm curious about is in your experience, what component is there usually a breakdown in? You know, from like the bad ones that you've seen, is it in the analysis component, the design, the delivery, the evaluation? Where do you usually see cracks? Not you. I mean, in your work, I'm sure it's all perfect, but
there's the obvious death by PowerPoint. It's the sage on the stage. And by the way, Alma, to your other question, in some cultures, that is super effective. That's the only
hierarchical.
It's and we had one of our friends on MSLOC who came from one of those cultures, and he said, I'm not used to this, team project, very little structure in class where you do the reading ahead of time and you have to talk about it in a group. And normally I go to class, I sit up at the back and I take 1,000 notes.
Yeah.
And then I leave. So death by PowerPoint is for sure a no-no. But then if it's too fluffy, if there's no real connection to the specific of the company, then if I fast forward to my role today, so I work for a private equity company as shared service. We offer learning and development, or leadership and learning and development to 8, 10 different portfolio companies. And one of our roles is to ensure that we're speaking the language of the companies that we support. So next week I'm down in just south of Orlando, and the program that is a very short program, but the session that we're going to deliver, it needs to feel like the facilitator knows the company, knows the culture, uses the words, and that the folks in the room are not saying, well, I see what you're saying, but this doesn't apply to me in my industry.
Yeah.
So you have to be a business partner. And so that needs analysis phase, Tuli, is super important. If you hear I need management training, go straight to design, you're probably going to fall flat. Doesn't matter how good the delivery is. You can have the best facilitation in the world, but if you're not using the right words, you're using employee instead of team member. Very basic example. Do you really know my business? And your level of credibility shut down from the get-go.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, totally. The needs analysis thing. I think then that's a good opportunity to go a little bit deeper into that. What is, I'll just speak from personal experience. I've mostly learned how important this is through, of course, failures, lots of failures, right? Of being.
Tell us more about them, Mama.
Yeah.
Sure.
So being confident, but the content is so good, but my colleagues and I were like great facilitators. We can work any crowd. We'll adjust to whatever. Like if it's execs, sure, I'll be executive for you. If it's young, what are they called? Potential leaders, etc. Fine, I'll be chill. I'll hang out with them. And so there would be so much focus on that, like that the needs analysis would often be lighter and more than a needs analysis. Here's where my question would be. More than a needs analysis, like there's an extra layer to it I have found that is also just kind of understanding your audience, your business's world. So you say you work with 8 portfolio companies. I assume each one has their own workplace culture. Maybe they're actually in different national cultures, et cetera, et cetera. And as a consultant, I've learned that it's not just like understand, tell me what the business problem is. Well, my leaders aren't, you know what, like we just feel that people aren't engaged. Oh gosh. Okay, tell me a little bit more. And then you have to go into more. And then really for you to understand what is it that they mean when they say that our people don't seem engaged. Well, we have a little bit of a survey. Okay, cool. What did the survey actually talk about? What is actually going on? Wait, how is it set up? So when you approach needs analysis, working with different companies, how do you make sure that you're really understanding the big picture, and that even if they tell you this is the business problem, I learned enough to know that I can't just trust my dear loving client right off the bat when they tell me what they think the business problem is, because it's probably much more than that, whatever. So how do you get around this? How do you make sure that your needs analysis really is thorough? What does that look like for you?
Yeah. Yeah. And what I'm about to share, comes, I mentioned this before. I think I learned a lot from going through a class called the 6 Disciplines of Breakthrough Learning by Roy Pollock, one of the co-authors. And I had the opportunity to co-facilitate with Roy. And we had them recently back to deliver a session for our team here.
Bob,
and so
can you,
the
sorry,
six
can you
disciplines. Yeah, it's called the 6 Disciplines of Breakthrough Learning.
A breakthrough.
If you want to work in our field of learning and development, it's a must reading. And it talks about define business outcomes, and it talks about document business results, D1 and D6. And so to answer your question, Alma, and there's other D's in the middle, but I go straight to D6, and which is document business results. And you can only document the business results if you've asked somebody up front the following question, which is, let's imagine we fixed your problem. What does that look like? What are people doing? And who will be able to tell us when we have fixed your problem? What type of metrics will they be looking at? And so if anybody has been in a job interview for a role in learning and development, you always get asked the question, how do you measure the effectiveness of learning? And my response, and I might do this in my next job interview just to be provocative, I might say, I have no idea. I have literally no idea. And then leave it at that and walk away. I'd love to do that. And then we go, who the hell's this guy? But I'd love to do it because I would love to say, I have no idea the problem that you're trying to solve. I don't know your business yet. I would love to get to know your business. And here's how I would approach the needs analysis phase. And I would go through the different questions I would ask. And then as far as the measurement piece, it's not my role to measure learning. It's my role to help us measure learning. Okay. You need to identify the metrics because you know your business the best, and you will know the behaviors that you're looking for and the best way to measure it. I can get the measurement, I just don't know what the metrics are going to be. So let's work on that together. And when you start to be provocative that way, you're automatically engaging the leaders of the company that they have to be part of the solution.
Yeah.
It's not have a half an hour conversation with Alma and Tuli and then expect miracles to happen. There's a great cartoon in the book, 6 Disciplines of Breakthrough Learning, where it goes, and I'm going to paraphrase this, but there's 2 guys standing at a chalkboard, and the description says, problem to be solved, and then a miracle happens, and then business results. And then the other guy goes, I think we need to be a bit more specific about this miracle, right? And you can't do it alone. You can't just say, okay, training department, go fix this. I'm going to spend half an hour with you now. Magically, it happens. They need to be part of it. And there's so many different ways that need to be part of it. But I guess that's our role as consultants, to bring them in at every single phase.
That's very powerful.
Yeah. So much gold in what you just said. In fact, I wish I could rewind time and just have that little tidbit of what you just said, and so that 26-year-old me could hear it and not make all the mistakes. Of course, in the end, they're very valuable. But
maybe, Alma, we go there because it's so interesting for those that are starting out and they're nervous about meeting with senior leaders. And we've all been there. You have your list of questions, and
Yeah.
Maybe the first time you'll go through it methodically, you go, okay, my first question is this. And you're not really listening to what people are saying. You're trying to think of your next question. You're trying not to sound like you've got no idea what you're talking about.
You were there with me, Bob? You were there? I didn't.
I was there 100 times myself. Maybe we're just in separate rooms. And the advice I would give you, 26-year-old Alma and 26-year-old me, although I wasn't even in my role when I was 26, is listen more and let them do as much. You're not there to dazzle with your brilliance in that meeting. They're not looking for answers in that meeting. They're looking for you to get as much as you can from them to understand their business. And then it's okay to say, this is great. I'd love to come back to you in a couple of weeks. We'll follow up. We'll pull together some thoughts. That won't be the final solution. We'll bring you in. Let's talk about it. But you don't have to dazzle with brilliance in the first meeting. Yeah. You're listening. That's all you're doing at that point.
Yeah. You're trying to learn.
Trying to learn.
It's, what is the world? What does it look like? What really happens? How do things work? Right. Which is now the name for that, right, is understanding the system or systems thinking. But you definitely don't start. You don't usually start unless, of course, you go through this course, which now I'm very intrigued by. But to add to that, there's another little component in there of what you were saying, the spiel that you just had, which is, you said something like, you have to make sure that from the beginning that the business leaders who are coming to you for whatever solution, that they are with you or partnered with you in every step of the process, and that they are also kind of the owners of what are the measurements, right? What are the outcomes? So you mentioned before we even started recording that you have Edgar Schein behind you on those really nice. Okay. Do you happen to have, I don't know. So it made me think of Edgar Schein's work on process consulting. Do you remember the metaphor he uses about the monkey? Does that ring a bell?
Say more.
Okay. I think it was just so mind-blowing for me when I read it. So Edgar Schein's process consulting, it has some principles. And one of the main principles is that from the very beginning, when you are learning, you're doing needs analysis about what this client needs, you make sure that the monkey is on their back. So the monkey being whatever the problem is, right? That it stays on their back, and that you, under no circumstances, being the consultant, the partner, put that monkey on your own back or allow them to put it on your back. That throughout. And then like the second part of the principle is the monkey must always remain on their back. And that is part of successful like process consulting, helping them see that this is still their monkey. It will always be their monkey. They better care about the monkey as much as possible.
I'm not sure I'm understanding, Alma. Sorry, okay. I'm a little slow this morning.
No, go for it.
Who's the monkey?
The monkey is the business problem.
Oh,
whatever
monkey
is the problem it is. Yeah.
And a monkey on its back is no good?
No, they need to, you as
on
the
their back, on the company's back.
Or the client.
The leader's
Let's say
back.
it's a person. Yeah, the leader, the business leader who came to you and was like, we'll just use the engagement one because it's one of the ones I hear the most. I don't know about you. Our people are not engaged. They're disengaged, etc. Like that's their monkey. Right? And often correct me if I'm wrong, I think at least external consulting, perhaps internal consulting, that miracle, the image you shared, right? The miracle they want is that you, instructional designer, L&D professional, you take that monkey and get rid of it for me. Thank you. I'll come back when it's gone. Right? So does that make more, does that clarify?
Yeah, I see. Yeah.
So Schein's thesis is that we do a disservice to the client and to ourselves, and we become less powerful if we just take on their problem and kind of own it. And I would say that's probably one of the biggest mistakes that I made in the last, 7 years without having the language for it, for understanding it. So I would go in and understand, but then put on the monkey. And so what you were saying, Bob, about that first conversation, going back to that first conversation with your business partners or your client, about you're just there to listen. So how do you, in your process, as you move into design and everything, how do you make sure that the monkey remains on their back?
You know, it's so easy to show value. And that's that at the end of the day, that's what we're in the business of, is creating value. And that value can come from multiple different sources. But ultimately, you're solving a business problem to create value further down the chain. But if you think about the value, is your value that you're solving the problem, or is the value that you're making it easier for the stakeholder? And I think it's easy in a moment to go, yeah, got it. And then you leave the room and you go, what the hell am I going to, I have no idea. And you're doing everybody a disservice because you haven't taken the time to understand what's going on. And then you're trying to come up with solutions that you're buckshotting, right? You're throwing 100 solutions at the wall and hope that something will stick. And I love the metaphor of the monkey in the bag. I really do, because a lot of times there's something in the system that's broken. And our role as consultants, external or internal, is to figure out what's wrong within the system. And that's one fix. But often there's motivations coming from the client themselves that, unless you understand their motivations for fixing whatever they need fixed, you're only seeing part of the problem. Let me share an example. So I was asked to roll out customer-centric mindset training. Can you roll out customer-centric mindset training? I said, sure. But in my head, I'm like, I have no idea. I've never done it before. We only did management and leadership. I'm like, we've never done this before.
Can you tell us what that is? Just what that means? Okay, that's exactly
the
question. That's part of it, because I think 10 years ago, Bob would have gone, great, I'm on it. When do you need to buy? 4 weeks? Great. We'll have it rolled out within 4 weeks. Go Google customer-centric mindset training, call the first vendor that comes up in Google and say, hey, can you come in? But I realized that
ChatGPT.
ChatGPT, what is...
Well, I mean, this would be this Friday if we could get ChatGPT to do it. That'd be awesome. But I realized that I had no idea who the end customer was. I had no idea what was meant by mindset. I had no idea who the client was. I was literally day 3 in my job. But more importantly, I had no idea what it meant to the stakeholder that was asking me this. And what I found out was there was almost an existential challenge here. If we don't fix this, we close the door, put the key under the mat, and walk away. That's how big it was. And so once I figured out, okay, who's the client? What problem are we trying to solve? What's getting in the way today? What did good look like before, and what would good look like in the future, and what's the current reality? You spend a good few hours on that, and once you understand what it means to the stakeholder, then you know you have them. You know that the monkey's going to firmly stay on their back, and you have their support throughout. And you need leadership support for visibility, being there, credibility, and so that was a big lesson for me. And I didn't have the language at the time, but using your metaphor of the monkey, if I take it on my back fully,
shines.
I wonder if I'd still be in my role today, because who knows? Who knows? If we didn't get that right, who knows where the company would have gone.
Fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm curious about a few more things, and maybe we should move on to a different topic first. But can you give some, like, I think you said before that creating value or showing value is pretty easy to do.
It's very, very difficult.
Oh, okay. So maybe not. Maybe
it needs to be the end goal, right? You have to have value at the back of your mind at the entire time. And what does value mean for the problem that you're trying to solve? You have to define the ultimate end goal and the ultimate end user. That's why, I mean, this is probably a topic for another day, but that's why design thinking is super powerful for that.
Yeah.
Right. Because like I have a stupid question in the back of my mind, which is like, does training work?
I
No,
love that question.
it doesn't. Training does not work, full stop. Training does not work. Doesn't. Wait, I probably need to check my business card because it probably says VP of training on it
Head
somewhere.
trainer
Like
of training.
No, this is professional suicide right now. So we're definitely going to edit this bit out.
But say more. Say more. Why?
Training
Why is it
doesn't
dead?
work. It doesn't. It just doesn't.
So why and what does?
So why do you pay people to do training? So obviously, there's a lot more to it, and it's a very, very provocative answer. But if training in isolation is your solution, it's not going to work. It's not. And I know that there's differences of opinions of the 70-20-10 rule, and we can get into the academic empirical data that supports it or doesn't. But I love the simplicity of it. And essentially, 70% of what you learn is through on-the-job experience.
Right.
Like it's the famous failures that we spoke about. And then 20% comes through mentoring, feedback, coaching. Like the Doinas, my equivalent is Doina. Doina was the one that beat me up when I needed to be beaten up. And she did that a lot. Apologies, Doina, if you're listening. But when I look back at some of those conversations, they were the best thing that I needed at that time. And I'm so glad that she did not shy away from any of those difficult conversations because I needed it. And then 10% of what you learn is through training, formal training. And so if we approach the design of any solution that we have with that mindset of 70% of what you're going to do with this is going to be outside of the training room.
Yeah.
So how does that factor into the design component, pre and post? How does that factor into coaching circles, mentoring, conversations with your manager, feedback loops? There's everything else that needs to be in place. Alma, you talked about systems thinking before. Training is probably right in the middle, but then there's all these other branches of it that need to be there. Ryan will talk about a culture of learning and all the different levers that you can pull to build a culture of learning. Has to start at the top. The leaders play a massive role. Managers play a massive role. Individuals play a massive role. So for sure, training is not your solution.
I love that.
That should be the title of our next book.
Training is dead.
Certainly the title of this podcast.
Yes. Actually, oh no, move over beautiful questions.
Well,
training is dead.
Yeah. Well.
We in our team, we never use the word training.
Yeah.
Or very, very rarely. As a team, we'll never use the word training.
Yeah.
We'll always talk about learning or development this is where I might contradict myself here. In some conversations with stakeholders, we'll use training. And only because it will come down to the level of maturity in the life cycle of an organization.
Right.
A large organization will do training, but we'll have everything else. We'll have the entire system to make the culture of learning effective. In some companies, there's literally nothing. So you start with training, because if you started to build the whole system, they'll be like, oh, we're not ready for any of that. Let's start with training and build it that way. Mm-hmm. And I've seen that be very, very successful in many organizations. Let's just get the training done and we'll do the pre and post afterwards. Maybe do that next year. So there's a phrase that I use, and it's horses for courses. Depending on the maturity life cycle of the company and the culture, you have to come in with the right solution. And sometimes training is the solution. But if we're getting very fancy about it, it's not the only one.
Right. And it doesn't work in isolation, which I think is a huge takeaway.
Yeah.
Right. No, that is a huge takeaway. But another kind of more like nuanced takeaway that I'm taking away from this is that, and this is helpful for me, is that even though, training does not work in isolation, it's not the entire solution almost ever. It doesn't mean that in certain situations, we shouldn't just do some training and start there. So,
Yes. And hopefully the training is well designed, well delivered, the right facilitators. It's not stage on the stage. And so there's, if you're going to just do training, let's optimize what we have. And there's a lot that goes into an effective design and delivery. So you're not really, well, of course you have to go through all 4 phases, but you don't have that extensive environment or system around it. but there's still a lot of work to be done for it to be successful.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I'm interested to understand. Okay, so remember pre-COVID world, right? As a learning and development professional. And now, from your vantage point, what would you say, like, what are the biggest things that you have learned about how people and organizations learn through all of this process, kind of with COVID? Do you have any big learnings in the last 2.5 years?
COVID was fascinating.
Yep.
Fascinating.
I loved it.
All the lights went off and everybody's in the dark and like, what the hell? We're not doing anything. And some people, I remember when a friend of mine said, oh, we're closing our offices for 18 months. And this is maybe March of 2020. Like 18 months?
Yeah.
We're closing for the next month. And you're talking about 18 months. And of course, she was right. In fact, she was wrong, but because it was another year after that, that's until things really started to open up. But overnight, we had to change everything.
Yeah.
And we had to learn how to facilitate in Zoom. And thankfully, if you're in a global role and you do a lot of virtual facilitation anyway. But what's really interesting now is this notion of time. Nobody has time anymore.
Mm-hmm.
If you think about, and again, this is a topic for the next 5 hours.
Yeah.
But if you think about what happened, everybody used to commute to work, call it half an hour. You'd go and do your job, and then you would take the commute home. The commute disappears. So let's say you're now adding an hour or two to your workday. So expectations. And people would say, and people would gladly go, you know what, I'm not commuting, so I'll just do more work. So all of a sudden, people's expectations and their managers' expectations go up by 2 hours a day. And now we're saying, no, you have to come back into the office. But those expectations stay where they are. Now you have to add back in half an hour or the hour commute. And so the pressures on people's time it's an area that I don't think we've given enough attention to. So when we come along and say, we're going to run a training program, a learning program on X, people will say, well, if you're doing it in 2 days, can you do it in one? And if you go along and say, can you do it in one? You're saying you do it in 1 day, can you do it in half a day? Or if you're going with half a day, can you do it in two? So everything's being compressed. And that's just hard. That's just hard to do. And I don't know if we've solved for it yet. But what we certainly are trying to do is make sure that the in-person discussion, one of the philosophies that we have in our team is that everything that we do has to be worth your time. It's actually the center of our philosophy. It has to be worth someone's time. And I say this a lot. If something's important enough, there's always time and there's always money.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what it is in life. Doesn't matter what project it is. If it's important enough, and we have to define importance and value, there's always time, there's always money. And so if somebody's saying, I don't have time to come to your training or your program, it's because they've said to themselves that it's not worth their time.
Exactly.
Yeah, this is a tough thing. I'm trying to like wrap my head around all this because I think that just people doing more work or spending more time at the office or more time logged into their thing does not equal higher productivity.
Right.
It just doesn't. It might. I mean, we've in our one of our first podcast episodes, we talked to Chelsea Watkins about outputs versus outcomes. You know, we might have more outputs there, you know, more emails sent or more whatever, but very difficult to imagine. And I think there are studies to back me up on this. It's not better. More is not better. As a matter of fact, we even know there are a lot of studies that show us that a 4-day work week might be effective or more effective in lots of situations. So I don't know. What do you make of this? What do you make of this idea of like just trying to get more in and stuff more in, and how many hours was I at my computer kind of thing? It's a little depressing to me.
And there's never going to be a shortage of work. There's never going to be a zero mail inbox. You try and clear out your inbox, and by the time you've gone to get dinner and come back, there's 25 million emails. Yeah. So there's never going to be a shortage of work. What's What's interesting, though, is your ability to prioritize. And we're finding that when you think about well-being in the office, it's not about programs. It's not about benefits. I would say that we have great programs that talk about managing your energy and, prioritizing this and prioritizing that. And our benefits are great, really great. We've got different days to focus on you as an individual. It's fascinating. But unless we're doing the day-to-day, what is truly a priority and what is just noise, we can't fix it. As an organization, we can't fix it. It has to happen at the individual level. It has to happen at the manager level. And it reminds me of one of the partners at my former role shared with me the analogy of a rocking horse, and I love it. So the rocking horse is in perpetual motion, but it's never moving forward. So you know how at the end of the day, you've gone, you know what, I just worked for 10 hours. But what did you achieve? Well, did you move forward one of your big projects? Well, not really, but I answered 100 emails. Well, then you're just in rocking horse mode.
Yeah.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
That's a great one. Oh, go ahead, Tuli.
No, I was just going to say that to me, like, for example, that would be the kind of thing that just giving like a training would not really help people with.
Yeah.
Right. Leaders need to role model being smart in their work, and they have to adjust their expectations accordingly and all that. I don't know. I think there's a lot here.
Time management is if I think about requests that we're getting for something in the system that needs to change, is time management prioritization. Because everybody's saying there's never going to be a shortage of work. There's so much that we have to do, but we're not yet good enough at saying, okay, what are the big things that we need to get done?
Yeah.
For anybody that's looking for another book out there, and it's a classic, it's Eat That Frog.
Yes.
Eat That Frog is such a simple book. You can read it within a couple of hours. But the frog is the biggest task that's sitting facing you like a big green slimy frog. But once you've ate it, because you know it's the hardest one to do, but it's going to have the biggest value, eat that, do it in the morning. Yep. Everything else is easier because you've done what you needed to do. It's the classic 2x2, important and urgent.
Right.
What are you going after? You're going after the stuff that's important or urgent. And how are you figuring that out with your manager? What's important versus what's urgent? So I guarantee most people are just focusing on the urgent.
Yeah. Yeah. That brings up a question about other cultures and their approach to time management. So how long did you live and work in France?
16 years.
16?
16, 16, yeah.
Okay. So I will admit that I have succumbed to stereotypes about the French, and my
Emily in Paris. Have you watched that?
No. Okay.
My favorite show.
I did watch.
Yeah, I love it.
But it's a good times. But I had friends who worked at L'Oreal, Colombia, when I was living in Bogota. And Bogota especially has been highly influenced, kind of like Silicon Valley. So kind of like hustle, grind approach to time management and productivity. So unfortunately, I wouldn't say that that's a good thing. So people are really literally used to coming into the office at 6:37. It's insane. The city is so alive at 5 a.m. because everyone's like, work, and there's a need to work. And so my friends who worked at L'Oreal were like, we hate the French. They're lazy. What is this? They come in at like 9:30, 10. Then they take these long lunches. And we're Latinos, so we technically used to take long lunches. There are certain parts of the country still people take long lunches, but not in Bogota. So that was my first introduction to kind of what they were saying was a French approach to time management. Or what was your experience, and what did you learn from the French about time and time management that you still carry with you today, if anything?
Yeah, it's such a great question. I think there's geographical culture is one thing, but I also think there's industry culture. So I think there's certain industries, and again, not to overgeneralize or stereotype, but the more creative industries, marketing, communications, advertising, and I have friends that work in that field. They'll roll in at 10, roll out 11, but it's a different environment, and I've seen that in France, and I've seen that in the US. But if I look at professional services, private equity, which is what I'm used to seeing, the French will work. I used to start 9:30 when I was in France, and then I would take a 2-hour lunch.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a bunch of us who would go and work out. We'd go for a run, take a shower, have your lunch. So 2 hours. But then I'd still be in the office at 7:30. Very, very common to be late into the evening.
Mm-hmm.
And so the number of hours that you're working are just it's just shifted.
Yeah.
If I look at the situation in Chicago, I'm typically in the office by 8 and very, very rarely after 5. Whether or not you check back in after work is depending on the season, and I would say it's probably more than not. But even if you just look at the streams of traffic to and from the major train stations in Chicago, at 8 o'clock everybody's going that way, and at 5 o'clock everybody's going this way. And so 8 to 5, there's no one downtown Chicago in the loop after 5:30. They're just not.
Yeah.
And so there's these stereotypes that are I believe are somewhat incorrect. Now, if you go to France in August, go to Paris in August, it's empty. Everybody's downside. The whole of the month of August, they're off. And they do protect their hours. They retire much earlier than you would in the US. I'm not sure about Colombia, but they do retire early. So there's a lot more of a collectivist culture over there. You pay a lot more in taxes, but there's a lot less wealth disparity between those that have and those that haven't. It's a preference. What did I learn? I learned that taking a 2-hour lunch is awesome. I think we should all do it. And I try as far as I can to encourage people to get up and move away from your desk. You know, we're talking cognitive design about ego depletion and the value of glucose and making sure that our energy levels are staying high. And there's this false narrative of if I'm in front of my desk, I'm being productive.
Ugh. Yes.
So a 2-hour lunch, and this may be the title for the podcast as well, but 2-hour lunches should be the norm.
Love.
With wine or no wine?
Well, when in Deloitte in France, there was a canteen in the basement, and there was wine and beer, and so you would see people sitting drinking wine and beer at lunchtime. I don't agree with that, simply because I'd be people sleep, but I do like the notion of it.
Yeah.
Me too.
In Australia, if you want to talk about cultures, I was working in Australia for 4 months, and I used to always wait for Friday because at 4 o'clock you would hear the clink, 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 and there would be somebody coming to fill the fridges with beer. And then the whole office would go and have happy hour on a Friday afternoon. That was awesome.
Ooh, nice.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. Very, very nice.
Yeah, well, I mean, I have to say, Bob, like one of the things that I admire about you, and this is the same thing that I admire about other leaders that I know personally, is that you have a lot on your plate, a lot, yet when I'm talking, you'll always make time for me. And I think you'll always make time for your students or your friends or and obviously your family, goes without saying. And when you're there, you're here, you're fully there.
Mm-hmm.
And like I don't know, I mean, first of all, I just want to give you that compliment, but second, I wonder if there's anything else that you could say about that mindset that might help our listeners and us kind of take a little bit more of that.
It's entirely selfish. Entirely selfish. And maybe we're coming full circle back to Cialdini, but this notion of reciprocity, give first, because you don't know the day that you're going to need somebody else to help you in return. And so, thank you for calling that out. I always find that I get as much, if not more, from these types of conversations than anybody else. So just the ability to sit down with both of you and have this conversation, it feels like we started 5 minutes ago. It's
we did, as a matter of fact.
And it's a privilege to be here. But joking aside, this notion of reciprocity is huge, because the more you give, the more you're going to get back. I think Adam Grant talks about that in Give and Take, right, in his book. The more that you give, people are willing to help when you need it. There's nothing worse when you go up to somebody you haven't spoken to in a couple of years and say, hey, can you help me here? You're not going to get the response that you're looking for. So, is it selfish? Am I doing it consciously to be selfish? No, but when you think about it, it's in everybody's interest to give more.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, can I tell you something interesting? I was listening to a podcast the other day, and it was Adam Grant, and he was interviewing Dr. Becky Kennedy, who's like she's a clinical psychologist, and she's become kind of this parent expert especially for millennials. Have been because she's on social media and stuff. Anyway, interesting conversation. And Adam said that at his table, I think he has 3 children. I could give you their names. No, I'm just kidding. I do not know. No, I'm joking.
If you're just tuning in, Tuli is a huge Adam Grant.
No, in his bedroom. Yeah, I'm sure he does.
Yeah, but anyway, so he said that at what point, they would ask their children at the dinner table, oh, tell me about who you helped this week or who you helped today or something like that. And then he said that his wife, Allison, Adam Grant's wife, yeah, whatever.
Grant, yeah.
Allison, yeah, obviously. That she instituted a new question saying, and who are the people that helped you, or who did you observe helping others also? So to not only instill in them that you should help, but to also, first of all, not be ashamed to receive help, when and also to just call that out, to see helping behavior. And that was encouraging to me also, because I sometimes feel, especially recently, that I've been in, I feel very fortunate that there have been a lot of people that have been very generous to me with their time and such. And sometimes, especially recently, it's difficult for me to think of how I can give back to them, because I'm like trying to start my own business right now and all that, and I'm trying to figure it out, but I don't necessarily have a lot of wisdom in the same way that they have given to me. So anyway, that was just encouraging for me to hear, and I look forward to it.
If you think about the power of the MSLC community, those that have gone before us, we celebrated our 20th year anniversary this year, and so I don't even know how many alum have gone to the program. It'd be an interesting statistic. But that, if you were to ask me, the value of MSLC is the community that we have. And nobody is ever going to turn down a call from anybody else that says, hey, I'm either a current or prospective or former student of MSLC. Can I take 5 minutes of your time? And that is huge. And I think that to me is the number one source of value that I've taken away from the MSLC. Over and above all the great classes and the instructors, it's the value of the community. And we all help each other in different ways. And Tuli, I think you're selling yourself a little bit short, because you helped me as an instructor. You gave me feedback in my ability to not give feedback on my papers. And that really struck a note with me. And so never underestimate the value that you bring by saying what other people will not say. Some people will think it, but you said it, and it made me better as an instructor for it. And so that alone is worth the time that I've always been willing to spend with you. So
for sure. I guess we should just tell listeners. So in the class that I took with Bob, I got a paper back, and I was unhappy with the feedback that I just felt like I didn't really understand it. I wanted more. So I reached out, and we had a really wonderful conversation. And
3 beers, but we should underline that one. Yeah,
that's right. No, our first conversation was on Zoom, but then a couple of months later we got together and had a bunch of beers, and that was awesome. And now I feel like we're friends, and I really appreciate it.
Oh,
no, I appreciate you. And these things are never easy to hear, but like I say, it's made me a better instructor. So that's my gratitude.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, I know we only have a few minutes left, but I want to shift gears and take advantage of your principle of giving first. And I'm wondering if you could. So, on the one hand, selfishly, I'm looking into internal consulting. I've been an external consultant, right? In these same types of areas. And I am sure that there are many listeners who are also in some type of internal consulting role or might be. So, if you could kind of summarize, like, what are you have all this experience, this wealth of knowledge, things that you've learned from. But Bob, what are your most important principles for being a successful or a good internal consultant? Big question.
Big question, but great question. The first one might sound a little bit generic, but know the business. And when people say, what does know the business mean? It's simple things like, if there's a speaker, if there's a leader, whatever it is, if there's a happy hour, if there's a whatever, if there's a group getting together and you're invited, go. Doesn't matter how busy you are, go. Build relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Take people to lunch. If there's a running club, go to the running club. If there's a book club, go to the book club. Whatever it is, always be in a situation to know your business. If you can go and walk the floors, I'm in real estate. Go do a site visit. Embarrassing story. I did my first site visit. You talked about mistakes, Tuli. I did my first site visit down in Austin just a few months ago, and I was very thrilled to be down there. I ran a session for one of the teams down there, and one of the EVPs, we were chatting, and I said, thank you for the opportunity of being here. This is my first site visit. He said, this is your first site visit? You've been in your role 3.5 years?
Oh, ouch.
Ouch. Ouch. And so massive learning for me there. Know your business, and know your business so that when you're having your needs analysis conversation, they know that they're talking to someone who knows their business, who gets them. And then other than that, it's listen and be curious.
Yeah.
Curiosity in our roles of L&D is the most number one skill that you can have. Get curious. Be interested, not interesting.
Just to follow up on that for 1 second. So the mistake there was the mistake that you didn't like. Should you have not told him that it was your first site visit, or was the mistake that you didn't make other site visits?
That it took 3.5 years for me to do a site visit.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just something you should have done
when it's a real estate company, like when sites are really important. Yeah.
Yeah. So it doesn't cost any money to go and do it. People are always willing to help out. If you say, listen, I'd love to get to know your business more. Can you walk me through what you do, how you do it, and how do you create value? This notion of value, we keep coming back to it. Help me understand how you create value.
Speaking of a beautiful question. Wow. Can you help me understand? I'm writing that one down. Can you help me understand how it is you create value? Was that it?
Yeah.
Okay. Oof. Golden.
And then shut up. Let them talk. They will be happy to give you everything that you need. Yeah. And then there's listening techniques to demonstrate that you're listening. Of course, there's paraphrasing, repeating back, summarizing in your own words. But all those skills, those fuzzy, soft skills that people don't think are that important, we spend hours talking about listening skills in some of our programs. Hours. The listening, if we can get the listening piece right, that is a huge skill to learn, because you're going to get so much more information that you can then use to demonstrate credibility.
No doubt. I feel like, maybe just one last question here. As you talked about curiosity as being, incredible skill. And one question that Alma and I like to ask our guests is, what's something you've been curious about lately?
Well, I would say there's the whole ChatGPT thing, but I've been super curious, and there was a great article by Josh Bersin talking about ChatGPT in the world of talent. Look it up; it's great. It should be open source. I think it's open source. but I've always been fascinated about the role of technology in the world that we live in, particularly in the professional world. We started off saying that I was a professional translator in 2000. And I remember back in the day going, this profession is not going to be a profession in 2025. It's just not. And we're in 2023, and there's still the translation profession, but the monetary side of it is not what it used to be. Because, and I know both of you speak multiple languages, so you know this. Technology can do a lot of translation these days, and so the role of the human is different today than it was 23 years ago. And so what I'm curious and fascinated about is what's the intersection between technology and the role of humans. And if you look at ChatGPT, and it's now widely known that ChatGPT can create materials. It can create slides and facilitator guides and everything else. So it's like, holy crap! If it's not perfect, and we know it's not perfect, but it's going to potentially remove a lot of roles that we do today. And if we're not thinking about it, we're not talking about it, and if we're not talking about what's the value that we create, and what's the value that we will continue to create as humans versus machines, we're going to be behind. We're going to be massively behind. That keeps me up at night. And if all it takes is you look at some of the things that technology can do, and a couple of examples real quick. One is technology can now have negotiations for salary, because the technology can determine small changes in your eyes, your cheeks, whatever, to say, okay, we had this conversation, and I know that the salary, this person was not happy with the salary. That scares me. We know that technology can be more accurate for cancer screenings. That's an awesome advance in technology. And so I think everybody needs to start to say, well, what is the role of technology for me and my role and my team and my organization today and in the future? And if we're blind to it, then we'll be perpetually behind and trying to catch up.
Wow. Goodness. Wish we had asked that question earlier. That is wonderful. Thank you so much. So much gold in this whole conversation.
Thank you. This has been fun. I wish we had more time. So maybe there's a second one in the mix.
Absolutely. Yeah. Stay tuned. Part two down the road. And Bob, thank you so much for doing this. And thank you for your mentorship, your friendship.
Yes.
And for sharing your wisdom with us. Really, we're really grateful. Thank you.
My pleasure. It's my honor. Thank you for doing it. And when I got your email, I was super excited. So I can't wait to hear the feedback on it.
Awesome.
Amazing. All right. Thanks so much.
Take care. See you. Bye.
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 I think so.
I like the French pronunciation. Is it Bob?
Bob.
Bob. Bob.
That's great.